Okay, last time we continued with Division E, entitled Motion on the Physical and Astral Planes, where we learned that all atoms, from an atom of substance to a solar logos, and that's important that we keep that understanding that when DK is talking about an atom, he's not talking about an atom of science, but an indwelling consciousness in some form, right? So, and he refers to that combination of the indweller and the form that they indwell as an atom, right? So all atoms, from an atom of substance to a solar logos and beyond, have a slight depression in the northern or receptive part of their spheroidal form, quote, through which flows the force which animates the matter of the sphere. The model for this energy downflow is Babbitt's atom, which is reprinted in a treatise on cosmic fire, thus giving it and Babbitt DK's endorsement. We then learned that energy from three constellations, Sirius, the Pleiades, and the Great Bear, flow into the solar logos, providing akashic, electrical, and pranic energy, respectively. Now, at this point, he doesn't go into a description of how these are interconnected, except for a little later in a page or two, he talks about the relation between the Pleiades and the electrical and its gift of electricity to our solar system. But otherwise, he doesn't develop these other themes. But it is strongly suggested by this pairing that they are interrelated. We were then introduced to a very esoteric passage, and this is where he relates the Pleiades to electricity, which is made up of 4 statements. So I went back over this, and as a result of input from a fellow student, and after looking at it for a while, I realized that I had made a mistake in connection with the second statement right here. Our sun is the embodiment of the heart or love aspect of the logos, which actually means what it says, that the physical sun is, hang on a sec, that the physical sun is the heart center of our solar logos, not, as I stated last time, that the solar system is the heart center of the 7 solar systems of which ours is a part. This adjustment makes our solar logos the heart center and the one about whom not may be said. All very esoteric, but important when trying to determine the cosmic hierarchy of influences. We then began chapter 3, called The Qualities of Rotary Motion, which describe the 3 gunas, tamas or inertia, rajas or mobility, and sattva or rhythm. These gunas are progressive, meaning that they mark the 3 phases in every cycle of manifestation for every unit of consciousness. Inertia is characterized by a lack of activity and the relative quiescence of the fires of matter, a state which occurs in the beginning of each cycle. Mobility by increased rotation, resulting in radiation, which makes possible interaction and interplay with other atoms, which is in turn characterized by the laws of repulsion and attraction. Sattva, the last phase, which DK calls rhythm, is described as the attainment of the point of perfect balance and of equilibrium. This leads to A, the disintegration of form, B, the liberation of the essence which the form confines, C, the separation of spirit and matter, D, the end of a cycle, whether planetary, human, or solar, E, the production of obscuration and the end of objectivity or manifestation. F, the reabsorption of the essence and the merging again of differentiated matter with the root of matter. G, the end of time and space as we understand it. H, the unification of the three fires and the bringing about of spontaneous combustion. And finally, I, the synthetic activity of matter in the three types of movement: rotary, spiral cyclic, and onward progression. So we spent a lot of the last session talking about these different stages that are part of the sattvic or rhythmic phase. We then started chapter 4, called Rotary Motion and Symbolism, where we considered the esoteric meaning of the circle, which stands for, among many other things, the ring pass knot of undifferentiated matter, as well as all atoms in the earliest epoch of manifestation. And this brings us to where we left off last time. So we're continuing with this consideration of the different symbols, which represent different stages of an atom's development. And the next stage is the circle with a point in the center. So we get a reader, please, for this passage.
Janet.
The circle with the point in the center. This signifies the production of heat in the heart of matter, the point of fire, the moment of the first rotary activity, the first straining of the atom, motivated by a latent heat. In the sphere of influence of another atom, this produced the first radiation, the first pull of attraction, and the consequent setting up of a repulsion and therefore producing. 3, the circle divided into 2. This marks the active rotation and the beginning of the mobility of the atom of matter, and produces the subsequent extension of the influence of the positive point within the atom of matter till its sphere of influence extends from the center to the periphery. At the point where it touches the periphery, it contacts the influence of the atoms and its environment. Radiation is set up, and the point of depression makes its appearance, marking the inflow and outflow of force or heat.
Thank you. Okay, so first, and two things. Anytime you have a thought or a comment, please jump in. As I've said many times, it's always more interesting. These webinars are always more interesting when we have interaction than just me talking. So, okay. Oh yeah, also, there's a lot of repetition the way I present, and it's on purpose. I'm going to be rereading this. I find that, I don't know if you've ever listened to poetry, David White, he always repeats his poems many times because it really takes us time to assimilate, some more than others, but nonetheless, repetition is very useful in this. So when you hear it the second time, hopefully other things come forward. That's the whole point. So first, the circle with the point in the center. This signifies the production of heat in the heart of matter, the point of fire, the moment of the first rotary activity, the first straining of the atom, motivated by latent heat, into the sphere of influence of another atom. This produced the first radiation, the first pull of attraction, and the consequent setting up of a repulsion. Okay, dot, dot, dot. So in this chapter, DK's definition of the circle with a point in the center focuses strictly on the genesis of rotary motion, which moves the atom from a state of inertia to mobility, from tamas to rajas. In his Fundamentals of Esoteric Philosophy, de Perucker provides us with a more cosmic meaning to the symbol. And also DK explores this much later in a treatise on cosmic fire. So could we get a reader for this, please?
Yes, and let me just add a little tech note that so people you just saw like a message that said about AI or whatever. It's a summary feature. Don't worry, it's just something I'm testing. Potentially that it'll give us a summary of the entire meeting.
Oh, cool.
Using AI, but we'll see how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and Veronica.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. Could you read for us?
Yes. Let us see if we can illustrate this by a diagram. Let us take an immense circle to represent the boundless, all which of course is merely a representation of space. Then place a point in its center. This point represents the first germ of the cosmic life. This point also has its meaning in the sense of a cosmic seed. Now, it is not one point only in the cosmos that springs into activity, but innumerable such points, such seeds. The number is limitless, practically, and each one of such points represents an individuality from the previous Mahamambadara. But these points, as represented in the diagram, are symbols, and the one stands, are symbols, and the one stands diagrammatically for all. If you please, this point in the quasi-infinitude of a hierarchy of a universe is the beginning of that hierarchy, and it represents the God of that hierarchy. This God itself is a synthetic aggregation of multitudinous other gods, as man's body is an aggregation, a synthesis of multitudinous lesser inferior life. Fundamentals of Esoteric Philosophy.
Thank you, Anne Veronica. So you can see the perspective here is completely different. By the way, a synthesis of multitudinous lesser lives, this is probably the most familiar use of the symbol in terms of the solar logos, right? So the solar logos represents all the multitudinous lesser lives which make up the solar system, and that synthesis is represented by this symbol. Another important part here is that there's not only one point in the cosmos that springs into activity, but it's symbolic of the event of multitudinous points springing into activity. So in that sense, all are following the same process of moving from the completely spirit aspect out into the form aspect. And so altogether they represent, as he says, one stands diagrammatically for all. So, but we'll be getting into this type of exploration later in TCF. So this symbol also has many other connotations, not least of which is the idea that the circle represents the limitation or ring past naught of an atom's field of expression or consciousness, with the point representing that atom's unmanifest essence, and then that circle, that the bounds of the expression of the consciousness aspect or the awareness aspect, as opposed to just the boundaries of its physical aspect, which is what DK is focusing on here. In light of the soul, the old commentary simply states, when thoughts call not to forms, and when no shadows are reflected, the thread provides a way direct from the circle to the center. From that point of rest, no return is possible. So you see, it has other and much higher connotations. But when used as a symbol for the first stage of atomic unfoldment, such as DK is doing here, the circle with a point at its center represents an atom's initial activity and the first stages of its movement from inertia to mobility. Okay? Okay. So next up, 3, the circle divided into 2. This marks the active rotation and the beginning of the mobility of the atom of matter, and produces the subsequent extension of the influence of the positive point within the atom of matter till its sphere of influence extends from the center to the periphery. At the point where it touches the periphery, it contacts the influence of the atoms in its environment. Radiation is set up, and the point of depression makes its appearance, marking the inflow and outflow of force or heat. So through rotation, the atom grows from its inertial phase into its rajasic phase. Through momentum and friction, a positive-negative polarity is formed, which is represented by this horizontal line. The life aspect, which was originally indicated by the point in the center, has expanded out to the periphery. This results in radiation, which allows the atom to interact with other atoms. As does the circle with the point at its center, the circle divided into 2 also has additional philosophic connotations, as described in this passage from Gerald Massey's The Natural Genesis. Can we get a reader, please?
Catherine, do you want to read?
Yes, that's fine. Hello?
Hi, yes, please.
Hi. At first, the circle expressed a limit and a total of time in which the oneness was then divided into the 2 heavens, or heaven and earth, and the various twofold forms of the twin principle expressed as the yin and the yang. Yin and yang are the twin total, the biune being consisting of the 2 principles into which the primary oneness everywhere divided to become male and female. Both principles of source as water and breath are feminine at first on the most natural grounds of observation, but when divided and distinguished by personification as the mother and her son, yin is the female and yang becomes specifically the male. The natural genesis.
So this strict mother and son duality, represented by the divided circle, has a different emphasis than the yin-yang symbol, which, though commonly used to illustrate the many pairs of opposites, more correctly symbolizes the interaction of these opposites, and even more esoterically, the inextricable interblending of spirit and matter. For as HPP states in The Secret Doctrine, matter is spirit at its lowest point, and spirit is matter at its highest. I'm just thinking of this now in, I think it's verse 5 of stanza 3, where you're introduced to Oeaohu, the refulgent glory. At one point, he talks about unfurling this veil from east to west. I'm just paraphrasing, shutting out the above from the below. So shutting out the world of spirit from the world of form, right? And that also, this symbol here is very much representative of, right? This is the veil that's unfurled from east to west. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Yeah. Gordon, do you want to read?
Okay. We are here only showing the application of cosmic symbols to matter and are not dealing with a manifestation from any other angle than that of purely material. For instance, we are applying the symbol of the point within the circle to the sphere of matter and the point of latent heat. We are not handling at this point matter as informed by an entity who is to matter when so informing a point of conscious life. We are dealing only with matter and latent heat, with the result produced by rotary movement of radiatory heat and the consequent interplay of bodies atomic. We are therefore dealing with the point we set out to consider while studying our fifth division, motion in the sheets.
Okay, so he's, indicating the limitation that these symbols represent within the subject matter of dealing with these esoteric teachings strictly from the physical point of view. He gives a hint at, he says, we're dealing only with matter and latent heat, right? Suggesting that the point in the center, in the physical, is that point of latent heat, right? That's then subsequently spreads to the periphery and shifts that atomic substance into from the inertial phase to the mobile or rajasic phase, right? But for the most part, we don't need to do a line-by-line analysis, right? DK here reminds us that in this division of the book, his commentary on the symbols is purely physical description of the atom. Thus, the point in the center represents latent heat, not the informing spirit, which is very often what this symbol means. And the periphery represents the physical bounds of the atom, not the ring past knot of the consciousness aspect. Okay, so next up, can we get a reader, please?
Joe Garso.
The circle divided into four. This is the true circle of matter, the equal armed cross of the Holy Spirit, who is the personification of active, intelligent matter. This shows the fourth dimensional quality of matter and the penetration of the fire in four directions. Its threefold radiation being symbolized by the triangles formed by the fourfold cross. This portrays the fourfold revolution of any atom. By this is not meant the ability of any atom to make four revolutions, but the fourth dimensional quality of the revolution, which is the goal aimed at, and which is even now becoming known in matter during this fourth round and in this fourth chain.
Thank you, Joe. Okay. First, the circle divided into four. This is the true circle of matter, the equal armed cross of the Holy Spirit, who is the personification of active, intelligent matter. So why does the equal armed cross represent matter? Robert Lawler's excellent book on sacred geometry gives us further insight. Can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, Kira.
When we cross a vertical with a horizontal, giving these lines movements equal units of length, we see that these crossing generates a square surface. A tangible, measurable entity comes into existence as a result of crossing. The principle can be transferred symbolically to the crossing of any contraries, such as the cross of male and female, which gives birth to an individual being, or the crossing of warp and weft, which gives birth to a cloth surface, or the crossing of darkness and light, which gives birth to tangible, visible form, or the crossing of matter and spirit, which gives birth to life itself.
Thank you. Thoughts or questions about this? I think it's really well described, the nature of this, of the cross of matter. Okay, next. This shows the fourth dimensional quality of matter and the penetration of the fire in 4 directions. Its threefold radiation being symbolized by the triangles formed by the fourfold cross. In the Secret Doctrine Dialogues, HPB gives a succinct definition of fourth dimensionality. Quote, fourth dimensional space, taken simply, means the fall of matter through matter, the impenetrability of matter. Well, HPB here actually misuses the word impenetrability to mean permeability. The fall of matter through matter represents the intermingling of higher stages of matter, more tenuous matter, with its denser counterparts, which is made possible by the mutual interaction of the law of attraction, which creates this interpenetration, and the law of repulsion, which allows the borders of an atom of substance, an atom of consciousness, to maintain its separate existence. So what are the 4 directions penetrated by fire? Exoterically, they represent north, south, east, and west. But Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1, gives us a more esoteric explanation. Can we get a reader, please?
Kirsten, you want to read?
Yes. Upwards into kingdoms hitherto unseen and unknown, downwards into kingdoms which we call subhuman, outwards into the human environment and into the human kingdom, and inwards, a meaningless word, my brother, toward divinity itself. This means towards synthesis, towards wholeness, towards the sense of the entire, towards totality. For all these 4 directions, of which north, south, east, and west are symbols, there are no specific techniques, but today I may only indicate direction.
Thank you. Any thoughts about this? Really expands the idea of directionality, doesn't it? Becomes much more subjective. The term penetration of the fire refers to the involutional stage when there is a quickening of hitherto quiescent planes of matter into activity through the agency of phohatic fire, which DK defines as the sum total of that which is active, animated, or vitalized, and of all that concerns itself with the adaptation of the form to the need of the inner flame of life. Actually, during the involutionary stage, it's the adaptation of the inner flame of life to the needs of the form. It's the interconnectedness of the two and the balance they achieve, which results in the three stages of inertia, mobility, and rhythm. Okay, so here are the triangles formed by the fourfold cross that he describes, which decay tells us represents the threefold radiation of the fire that has penetrated into four directions. The threefold radiation is made up of the three aspects: fire by friction, solar fire, and electric fire, though the higher two of these fires initially demonstrates, when you're talking about pure matter, and reference to a human being, as prana and the fire of mind. Can we get a reader for this, please? We get some sense of the subjective influence of these fires.
Magda, do you want to read?
Yes. In terms of fire, those who warm themselves by means of fire, by the friction, and respond not to the heat of solar fire, remain within the cavern, thus living in the dark. Whilst those being is irradiated by the sun of wisdom, and who bask in the rays of solar heat, dwell in the light, and enjoy an ever-increasing freedom and vital existence. The true significance of the three aspects of spirit is only becoming apparent to the initiate of high degree, and cannot be expressed in words, nor comprehended by man, before he has passed out the human kingdom into the spiritual. We might sum up the matter in terms of the old commentary from which source HPB quoted so often. The blessed ones hide their threefold nature, but reveal their triple essence by means of the three great groups of atoms. Three are the atoms, and threefold the radiation. The inner core of fire hides itself and is known only through radiation and that which radiates. Only after the blaze dies out and the heat is no longer felt can the fire be known.
So the last fire here described is electric fire, the fire of spirit. And what he's talking about here, that he's talking about the inner constitution of the causal body, these three great groups of atoms. They're the permanent atoms, which are the mental unit, the astral and physical permanent atoms, right? And that's the nature of the threefold radiation. Now, these partake of the three aspects of fire, but they're stepped down into the lower quaternary until one, as he says, only after the blaze dies out, meaning the Kundalini fire has done its work and the heat is no longer felt, can this final inner true fire, the electric fire of spirit, be known. Okay, finally, this portrays the fourfold revolution of any atom. By this is not meant the ability of any atom to make four revolutions, but the fourth dimensional quality of the revolution, which is the goal aimed at, and which is even now becoming known in matter during this fourth round and in this fourth chain. You can see the incredibly important connection between number, right? So fourth dimensionality is naturally fostered during this time of the fourth round and the fourth chain and the fourth globe, which he doesn't mention. So again, as described by HPB, the fourth dimension demonstrates as, quote, the fall of matter through matter, the, you could say, penetrability of matter. This necessarily requires an awareness of higher subplanes to have a direct experience of it, which interpenetrates the denser subplanes, the denser matter, the higher forms, thus making possible outer expression. For example, without the inner penetration of the etheric body, there could be no dense physical body. In esoteric astrology, DK describes fourth dimensional movement as a wheel turning on itself, which he defines as the combined influence of the second and third aspects of the solar fire and rotary fire. Really, the two ways that he describes a wheel turning on itself are the response to the esoteric and the exoteric ruling planets in any given sign. That's in the esoteric astrology definition of a wheel turning on itself, which is considered fourth dimensional. And then in terms of the activity of the chakras and their movement at a certain phase, which is what he's referring to here in terms of the fourth dimensional quality of the revolution, which is the goal aimed at. Because at this point, what's happened is the influence of solar fire is taking effect and is changing the nature of the revolution of the chakras. Okay, any thoughts about this? You guys are quiet tonight. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Yeah, before that, what was the book that you referenced again, so that I can
Lawler's, that one, the Lawler's Sacred Geometry,
Lawler's.
Lawlor. Robert Lawler.
Okay.
Fabulous book. It's about 100 pages, but if you get through it with understanding, you feel like you read a much larger book. And it's full of wonderful exercises as well. Okay, could we get a reader for this, please?
Yep. Maria Michaelis.
Yes. As the fifth spirula, or fifth stream of force in an atom, becomes developed, and man can conceive of a fourth dimensional rotary movement, the accuracy of this symbol will be recognized. It will then be seen that all sheaths, in their progress from inertia to rhythm via mobility, pass through all stages, whether they are logoic sheaths, the rays in which the heavenly men veil themselves, the planes which form the bodies of certain solar entities, the causal body or the sheath of the ego on the mental plane, the human physical body in its etheric constitution, or a cell in that body etheric. All these material forms, existent in etheric matter, which is the true matter of all forms, are primarily undifferentiated ovoids. They can then become actively rotating or manifest latent heat. Next, they manifest duality or latent and radiatory fire. The expression of these two results in fourth dimensional action, or the wheel or rotary form turning upon itself.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, first, as the fifth spirula, or fifth stream of force in an atom becomes developed, and man can conceive of a fourth dimensional rotary movement, the accuracy of this symbol will be recognized. Okay, it looks like we need to do a quick tutorial on spiralae, but to do so, we need to also take a look at permanent atoms, because that's where the spiralae affect their influence. So obviously this illustration does not depict a permanent atom, but hopefully it will stimulate your imagination. Maria will expect a painting by next month. Could we get a reader, please? What I'm going to do is go through a few quotes here on the permanent atom and their association with spirale, and I think we'll come out the other end of this with a little better understanding of what spirale are all about. Reader, please.
Okay, Marianne. It's Marianne there. Marianne Larson.
Okay.
I heard somebody.
Yeah,
Yes.
she's
Did you say me? Did you
Yeah.
say Marianne?
yes.
Yes, okay. A permanent atom is a positive nucleus or germ substance to the sheet wherein it is found. It is that which is the basis of form building, and it is literally a vibrant point of force, emanating from the second aspect of the monad, which aggregates to itself and subsequently builds into form, the negative or third aspect. But it must here be remembered that this second aspect is itself dual, and that in considering the permanent atoms, we are dealing with the feminine aspect of the second person. The spirili, therefore, are but streams of force or second aspect vitality, which circulates geometrically within the circumscribing wall of substance, composed of third aspect force or substance.
Okay, so I'm going to handle this just like it's the text we're going through. That is to say, line by line. First, a permanent atom is the positive nucleus or germ substance to the sheath wherein it is found. And it's going to be found in one of three sheaths. Remember the mental unit for the mental body, the astral permanent atom for the astral body, and the physical permanent atom for the physical etheric body. DK states on page 506 that the sheath containing the permanent atom is the causal body. So could we get a reader for this, please?
Mary.
The causal body is that sheath of mental substance which is formed at the moment of individualization. Within this sheath are to be found three atoms, which have been termed in the mental unit, the astral permanent atom and the physical permanent atom. They correspond individually to the seventh principle of each of the three persons of the microscopic triad. A reflection in the three worlds of the microcosm of the three persons of the logoic trinity.
Thank you. Okay, those of you who attended may remember that this subject was brought up during the last of all webinars, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And we talked about this idea of whether or not the permanent atoms were included in the causal body. Because if you look at the map, of the subplanes, the permanent atoms don't seem to be in the causal body. But we're here told that indeed, these three atoms are part of the causal body. Okay, next up, it is that which is the basis of form building. Talking about the permanent atom here. And it is literally a vibrant point of force emanating from the second aspect of the monad. You know, somewhere in his writings, DK says it's not really an atom at all. It's this nexus of, or vibrant point of force, right? So permanent atoms hold the qualitative info thus far developed in the career of an individual human being as he passes through his many incarnations within three vibrant points of force, which form the basis, the positive polarity used to build the mental, astral, and physical vehicles, right? So it really is that which holds the germ of what these vehicles will become at each incarnation. I see your hand. Yes, Catherine?
Yes, Francis, as you were talking, before you got to saying it held the germ, I was wondering if the permanent atoms would contain the karmic seeds or the samskaras that would go into the form building. And could we further maybe analyze that as, or speculate that could be the DNA?
Yeah, that's interesting. That I'll start by saying that the lords of karma definitely work with permanent atoms. They work, you know, with the ego and influence those permanent atoms to reflect the karma of the individual. And so that's built into these permanent atoms. And then tell me, say again what your the DNA thing.
Well, yes, I just was speculating as to what that might mean at a physical level, how we might understand genetics and kind of how that impacts us.
Yeah, I would think that physical karma is going to be built into DNA for sure. You know, the question is, you know, I would love to talk to somebody who has etheric vision when they look at DNA. What else is there? Because that's just what we're able to see in a microscope. But, you know, it suggests that that's just part of the picture, right? And that there must be etheric information there too. It would be fascinating, right? And in each vehicle, the astral and mental vehicles, there would be a kind of DNA pattern that I would think initially comes from this seed point, which are these permanent atoms. That's a really good point. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, Priya.
Yes, Priya.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Thank you. So, I think so far what I've read on the three permanent seed atoms, so they're even though they're located in the causal body, um, specific parts of the physical body where they can be located, the physical permanent seed in the physical heart, mental seed in the pineal gland, and the emotional seed in the liver and the solar plexus area. So the positive and the negative of the traits of the permanent seed atoms. Positive because it is radiating picture images in our system. The physical seed atom is radiating picture images of our karmic patterns from lifetimes upon lifetimes, whereas the mental and the emotional permanent seed is whatever we are doing in this lifetime, by our choice of free will, we can sort of overcome the past karma of the physical seed atoms picture images, which is constantly being radiated in the bloodstream by the influence of the positive actions taken in this lifetime. So it's just sort of intriguing to me that this permanent seed atom is positive and negative in nature, because it is kind of giving out picture images, but it's also taking in all the information from this lifetime, and when we leave the body it takes all of that with it.
Yeah, and that's done through the spirale, which we're going to be getting into, this impressionability, which, exists inside the permanent atoms. But I think HPB says that it takes 7 lifetimes to completely exonerate oneself from one's karma produced in a given lifetime. And so, for the but that's not to say that tremendous strides can be made, especially once one enters the spiritual path in terms of erasing the influence of the karma in the following lifetime, even though there could be residual karma carried on for as long as, we're told for 7 lifetimes. So interesting. Thank you, Priya. Very interesting ideas. This idea of the dual aspect, it's also impressible from the karmic lords, and therefore it has that receptive aspect, both from higher and of course from the ego, as well as from our thoughts, activities, speech, etc., which also impress it. And yet its positive aspect, as you pointed out, determine the nature of the vehicles when moving into incarnation. So
very interesting. Thank you so much.
thank you. Okay, I see more hands.
And Veronica.
I don't know if I can phrase my question exactly, but I was wondering what happens when we build the Antakarana and we take energy from the soul and we throw it into the nexus of the mental unit, so that we build up energy to send that double strand of light to the mental permanent atom. I was wondering what's going on there.
Well, that's the connection to the triadal lives, which is the source of the soul. I would think it would tremendously accelerate the amelioration of your karma. Of course, there's a kind of catch-22 here, because to get to the point where you can effectively build an Antakarana, you will have had to work through much of your personality karma already, even to be motivated to do the work of building the Antakarana, because before that motivation comes, the motivation is pointed towards the neutralizing of the karma that you've accrued over lifetimes. So it would take a certain stage of positive becoming, which is represented by aspiration and discipleship, to even have the impulse. But once the Antakarana has begun, then there's that quality of drawing from the. I see somebody who wants to be admitted. You might want to deal with that. I don't recognize that name.
I just enabled the waiting room and put that person in there because their name is Baltazar, which is,
could be good, could not. I don't know.
Right,
That's up to you. Yeah. Anyway, this idea of, we create our own opportunity through our aspiration, our discipleship, which then opens up those faculties that allow us to build the Antakarana, where you condition that mental unit in such a way that it can be receptive, and then you then drop down into the higher astral plane and project that beam of light upwards, and thus begin to build the Antakarana. But I would think that even when you're in that stage, you're in the latter stages of working through your personality karma, and that it would open the floodgate, because immediately what happens when that light is projected upwards, there's an answering beam of light. And I would think there would be a tremendous cleansing power that comes through that. Of course, there's no free lunch. You're going to have to work through whatever residual karma comes as a result of that intensification, which is why, it's difficult to, in those early stages of walking the path, because you're really brought face to face with what you haven't worked out, Okay, anyone else? Okay. So you think there's any chance they're legitimate? Or how do you feel about that, Mikhail?
I'm trying to communicate to them directly, and they're not talking, so they stay there until they talk to me.
Until they die. That's a good way to do it. Okay. So next, it is that which is the basis of form building, and it is literally a vibrant point of force emanating from the second aspect of the monad. Well, the second aspect of the monad is this ego, right? So permanent atoms hold the qualitative info. I read this, which forms the basis for the building of the sheaths. Next up, emanating from the second aspect of the monad, which is the soul, Buddhi, the Christ principle. From another point of view, it can be seen as the triad, which is the informing life aspect of the ego, which aggregates to itself and subsequently builds into form the negative or third aspect. So the third aspect is always negatively polarized to the second. Through the law of attraction, the soul aggregates atoms of substance into the appropriate forms as determined by the qualitative info of the permanent atoms. Right? So the permanent atoms determine the parameters, you could say, the nature of the substance that can be built into forms. It directs that process. Next, but it must here be remembered that this second aspect is itself dual, and that in considering the permanent atoms, we are dealing with the feminine aspect of the second person. The soul is both masculine and feminine. The masculine aspect is oriented to the monad, the feminine to the personality sheaths. And this feminine aspect, we find out in the next sentence, is the source of the spirale. Quote, the spirale, therefore, are but streams of force, or second aspect vitality. So spirale are units of second aspect vitality emanating from the feminine aspect of the soul. And finally, which circulate geometrically within the circumscribing wall of substance, composed of third aspect force or substance. You might assume that the wall of substance composed of third aspect force forms the three personality sheaths. Okay, so, starting to get a little idea of the purpose of the permanent atoms and the nature of these spirale. So we're going to continue here. These are not artist conceptions of spirale, but I thought they were quite evocative. Could we get a reader, please?
Lisa.
Yes. Just if you hear beeping in the background, it's my answering machine. I can't figure out how to.
That's all right. We can handle a little beeping.
Each of these permanent atoms has its own internal economy, as seen in the spirali, which are essentially streams of force, responding to stimulation and vibration aroused within and without their limiting ring pass not. The internal life of the permanent atom and that which animates and produces its activity is the life of the third aspect. The force playing upon it and through it is the life of the second aspect. As evolution proceeds, the intensity of the life forces from within and those which affect it from without grows gradually stronger and stronger, and the light of the permanent atom increases. The petals of the lotus unfold, and the spokes of the radiatory fire come into action.
Thank you. So first, each of these permanent atoms has its, excuse me, each of these permanent atoms has its own internal economy, as seen in the spirale, which are, spirale is just the plural form for spirala, which are essentially streams of force responding to stimulation and vibration, aroused within and without their limiting ring pass not. Okay, internal economy is written here, refers to the distribution and utilization of energy within a permanent atom, thus affecting its electrical, rotational, and vibrational energies. This internal economy is controlled by the spirale, which are also the response mechanism of a permanent atom, thus allowing the PA to evolve. Yes. Next, the internal life of the permanent atom and that which animates and produces its activity is the life of the third aspect. The force playing upon it and through it is the life of the second aspect. Okay, so spirale respond to the second aspect force playing through a permanent atom, which serves to further animate the lower spirale and eventually awaken the higher ones. Finally, as evolution proceeds, the intensity of the life forces from within and those which affect it from without grows gradually stronger and stronger, and the light of the permanent atoms increases. The petals of the lotus unfold, and the spokes of the radiatory fire come into action. Since the spirale govern the internal economy of a permanent atom, it is these little streams of energy that are responsible for increasing a PA's internal light. I see a hand. Yes, Jerry.
Yes, this is a question about the permanent atoms and esoteric healing. And there are some esoteric healing teachers that have a protocol of balancing the permanent atoms to the soul. And I wonder, given the fact that the lords of karma are working through the permanent atoms, I'm wondering what your thoughts are about working with the permanent atoms in esoteric healing.
Well, I think it's a very, as the term esoteric healing implies, it is a very esoteric form of healing indeed. This is first subplane matter, and you're not going to heal a permanent atom. That's not really the purpose, because they aren't flawed in any way. They're not diseased. They're not, all they're doing is carrying the information, the karmic information, as well as the stage of evolution that has occurred up till that time. Who you've become is carried in that atomic subplane matter of the permanent atom. So what you would actually be working with is neutralizing the karmic influence in doing that. I'm not a healer specifically. That's not my form of service, you could say. And so I wouldn't be able to say much more than that about it. I think you can always visualize and irradiate your visualization with light, and that can't help but find its way into the right place. But I think the concept of healing a permanent atom seems to me philosophically not really viable.
That's not the concept. It's they would agree with you. What the purpose is to bring the healing love energy of the soul to balance and integrate the three permanent atoms.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Yeah, it seems to me that ultimately what you're working with is those influences that would keep that balance from occurring, which are going to be, for the most part, karmic influences, So, and I think healing does work with karma. Karma can be ameliorated through accelerated means, in this way.
Yeah, thank you.
And it could, and if you're doing that, then it could influence that balance. It's a new concept to me, and I find it very interesting. I'd like to talk to somebody who's been doing it a while. Another hand I saw. Was that Priya?
Yes. So what I've read and heard and slightly practiced through esoteric healings is that in terms of the permanent seed atoms is that as a healer we can bless for the negative picture images from the permanent seed atoms to be sort of diminished, dissolved, disintegrated, etc., etc. However, because that's a love aspect that we're doing, it also, again, everything is in control of the lords of the karma. And if the other person is entitled, of course it will work. And we can always suggest the other person to do some sort of noble activity to be able to become more entitled to receiving those kind of blessings. So that's just my little input on what I've heard and practiced.
Thank you, Priya. Yeah. Karma is a blessing. Karma is the means by which we can, that allows us to walk the path. Without karma, we can never get past the barriers that we ourselves have created. But through karma, those barriers can be dissolved and we can move on, right? That's why it takes so many thousands of lifetimes, because we're constantly generating new karma, even as we're dissolving the old, and also just the dissolving of karma does not take you positively into, for instance, the stages of the initiatory process. There has to be a positive practice, a spiritual practice that will, the karma just allows you, as part of the purification process, it just allows you to prepare for those positive stages of discipleship and initiation. Anyone else? All right. Okay, next up, a reader, please.
Yeah, Priya, did you want to read?
Yeah. The karma of matter is concerned with the development of the four spiralae, with their activity, with their attachment to forms when atomic, and with the development of the inner latent heat and its gradual fiery increase until we have within the atom a repetition of what is seen within the causal body.
Thank you, Priya. In concert with the soul, the lords of karma work with and through the four lowest spiralae, which are responsible for development of the latent heat of matter. Another way of saying that is the stimulation of the Kundalini fires and its gradual fiery increase through the raising of the Kundalini. Wow, he says it. It is these four lowest spiralae that develop through the long experience gathering phase of a human being's journey. They're oriented almost completely towards the personality, even though the fourth spiralae is a bridging, just like all fourth plane, fourth subplane aspects. There's this quality of bridging connected with that particular spiralae. Any thoughts about this? Okay, I think this is our last in this section. Could we get a reader, please?
Yeah, Scott, would you like to read?
Personality ray deals with the first four spiralae and is the source of their stimulation. Note here the correspondence to the lower quaternary and its stimulation by the ego. The egoic ray concerns itself with the fifth spirula and with the sixth, and is the cause of their emerging from latency and potentiality into power and activity. The monadic ray is the source of the stimulation of the seventh spirula. As this fifth spirula or fifth stream of force in any atom becomes developed, man can conceive of a fourth dimensional rotary movement. The fifth spirula within the atom of matter will become active. This fifth spirula is beginning faintly to vibrate, while the fourth spirula in this fourth round is assuming a vibration that will cause the intense vitalization of the vehicles and eventually bring about the shattering of the form and the subsequent escape of the spirit into a form composed of matter which responds to the vibration of the fifth spirula.
Thanks, Scott. Any thoughts about this? So the four lower spiralae determine growth of the personality. The fourth eventually leading to the, quote, intense vitalization of the vehicles, which eventually brings about the shattering of the form. That's why I say it's a bridging type of spiralae. And the subsequent escape of the spirit into a form composed of matter which responds to the vibration of this fifth spirula, meaning that the fifth spirula determines the quality of matter of the new transfigured form taken by the initiate upon his or her escape from the lower quaternary. Okay. So I think as a race, human beings are, especially at this time during this fifth root race, as a kingdom, I should say, we're very much working on stimulating the fourth spiralae. And a few, the disciples and initiates of the world, are developing this fifth spiralae stimulation, right? Okay, hopefully we now have at least a little better idea of how the spiralae function within a permanent atom, as well as how the seven spiralae gradually unfold. We just barely touched on it, but as we go back to the text, maybe it'll make a little more sense. So as the fifth spirula or fifth stream of force in an atom becomes developed and man can conceive of a fourth dimensional rotary movement, the accuracy of this symbol will be recognized. The symbol being the circle divided in two, which suggests escape from the lower half of the circle, represented by the 4 lower spirali, into the higher half, represented by the 5th, 6th, and 7th. And the 4th is the transitional spirale. Interesting, because it's halfway through, so you really, in a way, have 3 below, 3 above, 3 absolutely personality dedicated spirale developed in that long unfolding of experience gather. And then the 4th, which is the bridging, just like the 4th subplane is the bridging. And then you have the higher 3, the 5th being the source of the new paradigm for the higher form. Okay. Next, it will then be seen that all sheaths in their progress from inertia to rhythm via mobility pass through all stages, whether they are logoic sheaths, the rays in which the heavenly man veil themselves, the planes which form the bodies of certain solar entities, the causal body, or the sheath of the ego and the mental plane, the human physical body in its etheric constitution, or a cell in that body etheric. DK here recapitulates an atom's progress through the 3 stages of inertia, mobility, and rhythm, represented by the 4 symbols, circles, and reminds us that the sheaths that progress through these stages range from those of a solar logos to the ray sheaths that heavenly men use to veil themselves. That's pretty trippy in and of itself. To the planes which form the bodies of certain solar entities. These would be great solar devas like Agni, Varuna, and Kashidi, the devas of the 3 lowest planes. To the causal body, the sheath of the ego. To the 3 lower sheaths used by an incarnating human being, to the sheaths of the cells, finally, then make up these 3 vehicles. So there's a massive as above, so below quality that inhabits all forms, that determines, I should say, the nature of passage through the phases of all these forms, from high to low. Finally, all these material forms exist in etheric matter, which is the true matter of all forms, are primarily undifferentiated ovoids. They then become actively rotating or manifest latent heat. Next, they manifest duality or latent and radiatory fire. The expression of these 2 result in 4th dimensional action, or the wheel or rotary form turning upon itself. An undifferentiated ovoid is represented by the circle. This is a completely inertial phase, no activity. The initial phase of active rotation, during which latent heat becomes manifest, is represented by the circle with a point in the center. This covers the movement or the stages from inertia to mobility. The duality of latent and radiatory fire is represented by the circle divided into 2. Very importantly here, that the point of fire, the latent fire at the center, expands to the periphery and therefore is able to become radiatory and thus connect and interact with other cells, other in other spheres of consciousness. And at this point, we're talking about fully rajasic, full mobility, right? The duality of latent and radiator heat is represented by the circle divided in 2, now fully rajasic. And finally, 4th dimensional rotary action, or the wheel turning upon itself, is represented by the circle divided into 4 parts. This is the sattvic or rhythmic phase, which eventually results in obscuration. Of course, you know, there's 1,000 intermediate stages between these. They're just symbols of a type of activity. Okay. Next up, can we get a reader, please? And this is the last paragraph in this chapter on rotary motion and symbolism. Can we get a reader?
Do you want to read?
Yeah. Can you hear?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay. 5. The swastika, or the fire extending not only from the periphery to the center in 4 directions, but gradually circulating and radiating from and around the entire periphery. This signifies completed activity in every department of matter until finally we have a blazing fiery wheel turning every way with radiant channels of fire from the center to the ring pass, not fire within, without, and around until the wheel is consumed and there is naught remaining but perfected fire.
Thank you. So the swastika represents the 5th stage in the journey of the atom from inertia to rhythm, and it's completely rhythmic in its nature. It's already participating in the phase of dispersing in order to return to spirit, of obscuration. Swastikas can be drawn to represent either the clockwise or counterclockwise motion, and have different meanings in different spiritual practices. For example, in the North American Pima tribes, the swastika represents the 4 winds, whereas in Buddhism, it represents the heart of the Buddha. There's just a tremendous amount of information on the meaning of the swastika and all these different spiritual practices. Okay, there's basically one other significant passage on the swastika, just a little further along in a treatise on cosmic fire, but let's take a look at it now. The review, when we get to it, won't hurt at all. Can we get a reader, please?
Yep. Back to Anne Veronica.
You there, Anne Veronica?
On to Catherine.
The swastika. At this stage, the center becomes 4th dimensional. The inner rotating cross begins to turn upon its axis and to drive the flaming periphery to all sides, so that the center is better described as a sphere of fire than as a wheel. It marks the stage of the path in its 2 divisions. For the process of producing the effect described covers the whole period of the path. At the close, the centers are seen as globes of radiant fire, with the spokes of the wheel or the evolution of the cross from the point in the center, merging and blending into a fire that burneth up the whole. A brief sentence has its place here owing to its relation to this subject. Another sentence is also added here, which, if meditated upon, will prove of real value and will have a definite effect upon one of the centers. Which center it is for the student himself to find out. These two sentences are as follows. The secret of the fire lies hid in the second letter of the secret word. The mystery of life is concealed within the heart. When the lower point vibrates, when the sacred triangle glows, when the point, the middle center, and the apex likewise burn, then the two triangles, the greater and the lesser, merge with one flame which burneth up the whole. The fire within the lesser fire findeth its progress much impelled, when the circle of the moving and the unmoving, of the lesser wheel within the greater wheel that moveth not in time, findeth a twofold outlet. It then shineth with the glory of the twofold one, and of his sixfold brother. Frohart rusheth through space. He searcheth for his complement. The breath of the unmoving one and the fire of the one who seeth the whole from the beginning rush to meet each other, and the unmoving becomes the sphere of activity.
Thank you. So hopefully you could see or get some sense of how these passages relate to this stage of the spheroid moving as the swastika moves. We'll analyze this passage in depth when we get to it, which is not that many pages from now. Okay, we now move into the last chapter of this division, called Motion and the Centers, whose subsections are the nature of the centers and the rays, the centers and Kundalini, the centers and the senses, and the centers and initiation. This is quite a long chapter, actually, full of great stuff. Because of their introductory nature, however, we'll be rolling through the next few pages almost without comment. So, if you have a question for about anything that we read through, just raise your hand. If I pick up something along the way that I should have expanded on, we'll do that as well. But for the most part, we're just going to be reading here for a little bit. So could we get a reader, please, for this? Yes, I see a hand.
5, motion and the centers. We can take up this matter of the centers along 3 lines. Much has been written and discussed anent the centers, and much mystery exists, which has aroused the curiosity of the ignorant, and has tempted many to meddle with that which does not concern them. I seek to elucidate somewhat, and to give a new angle of vision to the study of these abstruse matters. I do not in any way intend to take up the subject from such an angle as to convey rules and information that will enable a man to vivify these centers and bring them into play. I sound here a solemn word of warning.
Thank you, Stephen. Or Stefan.
Thank you.
So let's continue. A reader, please.
Gordon.
Let a man apply himself to a life of high altruism, to a discipline that will refine and bring his lower vehicles into subjection, and to a strenuous endeavor to purify and control his sheaths. When he has done this, and has both raised and stabilized his vibration, he will find that the development and functioning of the centers has pursued a parallel course, and that, apart from his active participation, the work has proceeded along the desired lines. Much danger and dire calamity attends the man who arouses the centers by unlawful methods, and who experiments with the fires of his body without the needed technical knowledge.
Thank you. Of course, the needed technical knowledge comes through mostly through initiation. It's not so much a knowledge base as an intuitive response to that which is given through the rite of initiation. Yeah, let's continue.
Janet.
He, by his efforts, succeed in arousing the fires and in intensifying the action of the centers. But he will pay the price of ignorance in the destruction of matter, in the burning of the bodily or brain tissue, in the development of insanity, and in the opening the door to currents and forces undesirable and destructive. It's not the part of a coward in these matters concerning the subjective life to move with caution and with care. It is part of a discretion. The aspirant therefore has three things to do. 1, purify, discipline, and transmute his threefold lower nature. 2, develop knowledge of himself and equip his mental body, build the causal body by good deeds and thoughts. And 3, serve his race in utter self-abnegation. Oops.
Self-abnegation, it's a hard word to say. Yeah, I mean, we don't need to go through these, but that doesn't mean it's not tremendous material to ponder, right? How in your life do these apply, purification, know thyself, that dictum, and service, and this is without any direct involvement in trying to stimulate the centers. You can be brought to the threshold to where that's appropriate through these 3 steps. Okay, let's continue. Reader, please.
Ira.
In doing this, he fulfills the law. He puts himself in the right condition for training, fits himself for the ultimate application of the rod of intention, and thus minimizes the danger that attends the awakening of the fire. All that is intended to do in this treatise is to cast some further light upon these centers, to show their interrelation, and to trace the effects produced by their rightful development. To do this, as before stated, the subject will be divided into the following divisions. 1, the nature of the centers. 2, the centers and the rays. 3, the centers and kundalini. 4, the centers and the senses. 5, the centers and initiation.
So you can see, we've been talking about, there was a section on raising the kundalini, and it necessarily involved the stimulation of the centers, but this is there's going to be much more information on this topic in this section, in this chapter. So once again, let's continue. Reader, please.
Kirsten.
As can be seen from the above tabulation, the subject is not only vast but abstruse. This is principally owing to the fact that until the race is normally clairvoyant, it is not in a position to verify what is said and has to accept the statements of those who profess to know. Later, when man can see and prove for himself, it will be possible to check up these statements. The time is not yet except for the few. 1, the nature of the centers. Let us take the first point. I wish to enumerate the centers to be dealt with in this treatise, keeping the enumeration very closely to that laid down earlier and dealing not with all the centers, but simply with those closely concerned with man's fivefold evolution.
Okay, so, basically saying that at this time in the Aryan race, we as yet have not developed etheric vision, even though there's few increasing numbers all the time who have. But even when you've developed it, you have to be trained in terms of what you're seeing when you can see etherically, so that you understand for instance, the nature of the movement of the centers, how the vision of these centers relates to the progression of the fire, etc. It's the vision doesn't automatically give that person knowledge of what they're seeing, right? But the time will come, 6 sub-rays, where higher mind will be much more prevalent, should bring in many, many more people with etheric vision. And then this will all develop into an outer science, right? Okay, so let's continue. Can we get a reader, please?
Magda. Are you able to read, Magda?
Yes, I'm sorry. As before stated, man, at the close of his long pilgrimage, will have passed through the 5 kingdoms of nature on his way back to his source. 1, the mineral kingdom. 2, the vegetable kingdom. 3, the animal kingdom. 4, the human kingdom. 5, the superhuman kingdom or the spiritual kingdom.
And Magda, will you continue, please? Could you continue reading, please?
Did I go on?
Yes, please.
Hello?
Hi, yes. Can you continue reading, please?
Yeah, I see number 5 and then finished. I don't see anything else. Okay, now I see. Thank you. And we'll have developed full consciousness on the 5 planes: the physical plane, the emotional or astral plane, the mental plane, the intuitional or the Buddhic plane, the spiritual, atmic or nirvanic plane, by means of the 5 senses and their correspondences on all the 5 planes. 1, hearing. 2, touch. 3, sight. 4, smell. 4, taste. 5, smell.
Thank you, Magda. So the suggested association between the planes and the senses is confirmed later in this chapter. Can we get a reader, please?
Maria Michaelis.
Each of these 5 senses has a definite connection with one or other plane and has also a correspondence on all planes. Let us first take up each of these senses, point out some interesting facts in connection with them, and suggest their subplane correspondence. Do you want me to read across?
Yes.
The plane is physical, the sense is hearing. Number 2, the plane is astral and the sense is touch or feeling. The mental plane is, its sense is sight. The 4th plane, Buddhic, the sense is taste. The 5th, Atmic plane, the sense is smell.
Thank you, Maria. Of course, all these senses demonstrate on each of the planes, but there is a specific further correlation with the planes themselves. And as we get into the senses, and we will be, because that's where this chapter moves us, we'll start to understand these deeper association with the actual planes. But that finishes the introductory material, and we'll now continue with our line by line analysis. We just whizzed through about 3 pages of the introductory comments, and now we're into this first section. But I'm going to pull the plug here. We're at just a couple of minutes before the finish, and it's a natural stopping place. So does anyone have any final thoughts or questions before we stop? If not, we have announcements for the next webinar series. Let's see, I think we're at the place where just day after tomorrow is we're going to be doing the Secret Doctrine. And then, of course, 2 weeks from today, we're back with a treatise on cosmic fire. And then we're into next month again for the secret teachings. And yes, Om Swaha. Do you have a question?
I do. Thank you for calling on me. Yes, this is Ariane from San Francisco. Yes, thank you for taking my question. I have 2 questions. One is that this idea of the swastika and things spiraling and radiating light. And then this idea of like increased vibration. And then this other thing, which is this idea of stillness, which is associated with like sattvic qualities and equilibrium. And I'm just wondering if you could explain how those 2 things interact. And then the second thing is, if you have any last thoughts before you close this reading and commentary about how to make this information practical, as in order to, like, I think everyone probably here more or less wants to accelerate their spiritual development. So those are my 2 questions.
Okay, well, first of all, the relationship between the swastika and rhythm, the rhythm comes in 2 stages, really, which is that the where you have the coming together of the equilibrium of spirit and matter. There's a balance achieved, and DK really focuses on the quality of that balance that is achieved, but which then immediately results in what I think is indicated by the swastika, in this sense of the swastika, right? Which is absolute rotary motion in both directions at once, a wheel turning on itself. That is what you have then, is both solar and radiatory fire coming together and burning up the whole, as it said in that one commentary, right? So the old paradigm, which is the material or physical nature of the motion, is superseded now, and you move into a solar fire reality, right? That then draws down the fire of spirit and the subsequent obscuration of the physical, right? That's that movement that is brought about by the activation of the 5th spirale. And you could say that indeed that quality of the swastika stimulates the 5th spirale. Notice that it's the 5th symbol too, and that we could relate the symbols directly to the 5 spirale as well, even though he doesn't really go into specific definitions of the nature of the first 3, right? Okay, in terms of the usefulness of this material, right? This is how, it's important to consider how this can inform our form of service, right? You're not going to be running out and grabbing the first person on the street and telling them about spirally. I mean, I might, but no, just kidding. There's always that sense you're excited about information, and there's this sort of wall between those who you tend to serve and this material. But in general, in coming into an awareness of the inner realities, you build a connection with the soul. This material, I think, very definitely has you're uncovering the map between yourself and solar consciousness. And this is just one piece of that map. And it helps you to become a little more soul-oriented and bring that perspective into your outer service, even though you're not going to be describing this material per se, to others. So hopefully that helps. Nisa.
I just wanted to say that I think over a vast number of years, in my case, of studying all this, I think it has gradually given me at least a tiny step to look. If somebody says something to me, I have a little bit of a higher view sometimes. Mm-hmm. When somebody says that they're having an issue in their outer life,
right?
And there is, what was it like? A lot of the things that Tuya has done with mudras, and I was doing a real basic meditation class, and somebody brought up mudra, and somebody said, well, they wanted to know what the purpose of a mudra was. And because of being around y'all, I was able to say, well, I don't know, but that the mudras do have an energetic power.
Yeah.
So, and that there's a lot more than I know about, but they're functional in many different situations, which I couldn't begin to pass on,
right.
Nor would I care to in a basic meditation class, but that's just an example of, I think, this material, as you study it, it just gives you a little bit different perspective as the decades progress.
Well, that's been my experience too, Nisa. That I'm a very different person than when I started reading this, and I would like to think that it is in part because I started reading this back in the mid '80s when I really started doing this with some intensity, and these 40 years later, I think that I'm much changed. Largely as a result of interfacing with this material, and hopefully it informs my service. You can never know, because you can't compare yourself with what you'd have been if you hadn't done this, but we tend to have a feeling for these things, and so what you said, I think, is an experience that a lot of people have as a result of spending years with this material. For those of you who are newer to this, it's a way of quickly shifting your perspective from pure personality into a more spirit-oriented perspective. And I found that when I began, that happened very rapidly, that I was really blown away by the new perspective that it afforded me, even though it took me decades to actually integrate it in any meaningful way. So, anybody else?
Yeah,
Final words?
there's just the one question Helios asked if you recommend going back to the recordings. And so I posted the full
Sure.
commentary page from MDR, the previous fellowship from MDR, and the link to the recordings from this one.
Right. All these are available. You could go. I think we started on page like 77 because Michael Robbins had done the first 77 pages. So, you could spend, many fruitful hours listening to recordings of webinars. Makara.us is an incredible source of recorded information, both by students, faculty. When I say students, what I really mean is faculty of the Morning Federation, and as well as Michael's extraordinary number of recordings with insights. So, Makara.us, and just browse and see what you respond to. I think that's a great way to go. Yes, so I fully recommend it. Okay, that'll do it for this time.